Tobias Matthew, welcome to the Happy Days podcast with me, Callum Church. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, mate. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, mate. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good to connect, definitely.
Absolutely, mate. So to kick us off for the podcast, you want to just introduce yourself to the audience, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
For sure, yeah. Try and not give too long-winded an explanation for this. So, to be honest, I'm a normal guy. That's kind of the idea of what I'm really about. I won't give my kind of life story, but what I'm I guess what I'm here for basically is kind of from what I went through recently. In the last year, went through quite a big period in my life, as many of us did with COVID, and kind of really confronted, my mental health, stuff like that, and got to the stage now where I really wanted to use what I had learned, and I obviously we'll dive into that, in the coming episode, but use what I've learned, to help myself, to kind of put it out there and help other people. Pretty much, I think that's it in a nutshell. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, if that's interesting to know. 24, live in Leeds. That's pretty much all you really need to know. Just a normal guy, is if there is such a thing.
Awesome, yeah. I find it funny how, well, funny is probably the wrong word for this, but it's interesting how a lot of the guests I get on this podcast, a lot of them are either successful people, driven people, or just looking to do something really good with their lives. It's interesting to see that a lot of those people have struggled somewhat in their lives, usually around our age, early 20s, and that sounds like it's the case for you. So what did you struggle with specifically? You mentioned mental health and confronting that,
yeah.
But what was it?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting observation, that, right? I think, like, in many ways, life is suffering. It's kind of one of the Buddha's, sort of famous lines, and I think that it takes a certain amount of that to kind of get you to a point to, at which you kind of go, oh, no more. I want to change things. There's a certain point which most people kind of tolerate, and I think when you get to a certain point, yeah, you take the decision to change things, and that's kind of a necessary step in it. For me, it's sitting where I am now, having gone through what I've been through in the last year. I know in a way it was kind of like always carrying a level of insecurity, carrying pain around with me, which I think probably all of us do to some extent, kind of throughout my upbringing. Not throughout my upbringing, but through my sort of childhood time at school, as many people do, kind of had my own sort of set of insecurities, nothing too crippling, but sort of as I started to get through university more, realized I had, to an extent, had some social anxiety, nothing out of the ordinary. Again, I think like what most people do, just kind of generally felt I was a bit goofy, didn't quite fit in, kind of had these stories running around in my mind, as to kind of who I was and why I didn't fit in, why I wasn't good enough. But yeah, nothing too serious. But what basically happened, I lived by myself. So kind of when COVID struck, and I'm quite a sociable person, although I like living by myself. I like my own space. I at the same time, thrive off being around other people. When that option was taken away, it just, as it did for all of us, right, completely flips reality upside down. And I was left without the things that I used to rely on to give my life meaning, but also, as I now realize, distract myself, kind of numb my pain, distract myself from my insecurities and my problems, and kind of I want to say give the illusion of having meaning in my life. That sounds a little bit strong, because I don't think it, I think you can get meaning out of whatever you choose to get it from. But it's like having like sort of social interactions, having friends around, a lot of, a young guy, going out on the weekends, going partying, whatever it would be, without all of those things anymore. It was just me and my thoughts 24/7. And we've all experienced whether you've lived alone or just with one or two other people throughout this, we've all experienced what isolation does to us, right? Because it's not a natural state to be in. And yeah, it just, I very quickly, my mental health deteriorated, because I just didn't have any understanding about really how to cope with it, or how to process any of this stuff. started to become, you know, more anxious and sort of just worrying quite a lot. I can't even really remember about specifically what, but just, you know, feeling quite like hard done by, playing over these like victim stories in my head, you know, like, why me? Why has this happened to me? I'm 20, 24, 23, whatever I was at the time, meant to be having the best summer of my life, you know, just playing all of this negativity, and it just over time compounded and got more and more sort of intense. And then it started, you know, a lot of these sort of insecurities started coming up, and I was just caught in these negative thought spirals, negative thought loops, like, you know, throughout the whole day. Didn't really want to get out of bed, found it really hard to sit down and do work, you know, actually kind of working from home. And you know, I work in sales, and it's, you know, obviously like sort of target driven jobs, and it wasn't a nice time, right? And it got to the stage where eventually I was turning to stuff like booze, and, you know, watching like whole loads of TV, and turning to whatever I could to try and numb this. But at the point, it got to a point where it just didn't work anymore. And I remember actually it was kind of when things started to lift, and I had my two of my best mates came up, and I just completely broke down, like hysterical crying for, I think it was probably a good couple of hours. And all this stuff just came up that I'd been, you know, kind of not dealing with and suppressing for years. And after that, I felt amazing, I'll be honest. You know, it was before that I kind of thought the idea of crying like that, like that in front of, you know, two of your best mates for a young guy, would have been terrifying. But I felt so much better. I felt like empowered. I felt empty, and I was like, okay, there's clearly something here, right? Like, you know, you always kind of hear a little bit about how we should not bottle up our emotions, but I didn't really look that much into it. And that moment just made me think, well, actually, I need to start, you know, actually understanding what's going on here. First of all, I realized that I had a problem, and that I wanted to do something about it. And basically just decided to start looking into it, and kind of search self-help. Came across, you know, this book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which is, I believe, essential reading for anyone. And yeah, it's a cliche phrase, but that just it changed my life almost overnight, that book, because it introduced me to the fact that something that no one had ever told me before, that I wasn't my mind, that I wasn't my thoughts, that there was a difference, you know, and that this kind of reality that I was living in, this pain, was, you know, in many ways self-created, and that within me was the ability to change that. And that was it, really. I think I can't actually remember what your original question was. It was what suffering did I go through, didn't it?
No,
Wasn't it? So
you went deep there. I love it.
I did, mate. Yeah, we don't hang about.
No, thank you for sharing that, though, because that's
my pleasure.
It's great, and I love how passionate you are about this. It's clearly coming across with everything you're saying. So it is interesting. I think you followed a path which a lot of young guys follow, including myself in some ways in my past. I think everyone follows this, and it generally comes down to the idea that men have to be masculine, you know, macho, strong. But the issue with men is that they're being seen to be strong, but they're not actually putting the work in to be strong themselves internally.
Yeah.
You know, externally they're putting up this facade. Internally, it's not quite correct there, and we get onto that a little bit later in the podcast with the social conditioning stuff we're going to talk about. Just before we do, though, I just want to ask you, you're incredibly self-aware, and it takes a lot of self-awareness to bring you out of where you were and start getting focused on where you are now, right? Where did that self-awareness come from? You know, how did you shake yourself out of that?
Yeah,
mindset?
That's a good question. So actually, I think to an extent, I've always had that inclination a little bit, but I do think, particularly from my time at school, I went to boarding school for about 10 years. My parents were in the army, and sort of all my siblings went to the same boarding schools, and I was really privileged to have that experience. Right, it was great schools, but it carries its own kind of unique set of challenges. And I think I always felt this internal pressure to kind of be someone or do something, or was very hyper aware of kind of how I was perceived by other people. And I think in my head, probably this is true of a lot of people at school, had this idea that to be happy meant being liked and being popular, and being liked and being popular meant being cool meant being good at sport or good at something, right? And so yeah, I just remember I was very focused on trying to be someone, trying to be this guy, trying to be good at all these things, and was just really conscious of when it didn't seem like that was landing with people, you know. And I think that's why I had this narrative that I didn't fit in, that I was an odd one out, or whatever it was. When I left school, I really decided, do you know what, I want to address this. You know, I'm not just going to settle for, you know, being misunderstood, if that even was the truth, which I think it probably was to an extent. Because, you know, we create our own reality, which we'll get into. But yeah, I decided to really think about it. And everyone else went off to university. I tried to go to drama school, but didn't get in because I couldn't act. So I spent 6 months working at Sainsbury's before going traveling by myself. And that experience, I think, was where it kind of really, you know, you don't have anyone else, no one knows you. You can kind of almost remake yourself. That cliche phrase of actually finding yourself. I think it's more about actually unlearning the bits that aren't you than you know, kind of discovering new parts of you. But yeah, just spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what don't I like about myself, what don't people like about me, and went to the other extreme, and I became a people pleaser, which, you know, I'm recovering from now. You know, people pleasing is actually, on the surface, it seems like a sort of really positive thing, but it's actually a bit of a toxic trait where you're trying to subconsciously manipulate other people to get validation and approval from them because you don't give it to yourself. So that's kind of where it happened. I went to the other extreme, and I think that level of self-awareness, I've kept up with it and always been, you know, practicing it. But from being a people pleaser throughout my sort of time at university, I was just always really conscious of what people thought of me, and you know, kind of therefore what was going on myself, you know, what was going on internally.
You mentioned you had army parents. Do you think that's sort of you know, because for a lot of people that have grown up in a very you know, army family household type thing, obviously before you went to boarding school, if you know, you do get certain characters come out of those type of households when they're growing up in those places. Do you think that's affected you somewhat? I'm just a random question. I'm interested
it's
to
an
hear.
interesting one, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's like I think it would be more the sort of the boarding school than being in an army family, you know, because when I was before actually starting school, you know, yeah, my parents were in the army, but other than kind of a few tours, you know, of Iraq or whatever, when my dad was away, for the most part, when I was younger, you know, I think my parents were kind of there the whole time. You know, they were working in the UK. For me, the army was just this kind of, and I think it is in many ways, that this big family that you know, it was the reality I knew. I felt like that's what everyone experienced. I think the real part of it was that boarding school element, because, you know, you don't, and I actually discussed this with some of my siblings recently, you kind of don't have that, you know, we're not all together as a family. We're all sort of quite close and everything, but we didn't sort of grow up, you know, cohesively together. And I think that's the element of it, probably.
Yeah, interesting. I just wanted to throw that in there because I was just intrigued to know. So, social conditioning, you know, I was talking earlier about how there's been this sort of built up facade, which a lot of young guys put on to be seen to be strong, but they're not actually truly strong. Where's that come from, Tobias? Why are so many guys like that?
Yeah, big question. That I think there's so many levels to it. You know, you can go all the way down to sort of call it evolution, but to the way sort of, you know, roles, male and female roles have evolved in society all the way back from you know, kind of historically. I don't want to go too deep into that. I think primarily it's about our relationship, comes back to our relationship, I think, as a society with pain, with this idea of pain. I think that we're so kind of identified as a culture with this idea that sort of pleasure is you know, the best thing in the world, and that the opposite of pleasure, pain, discomfort, is something to be avoided. You know, the whole kind of consumerist capitalist system is set up on sort of manipulating these two things of, like, you know, using the addictive nature of pleasure to get us to buy more pleasurable things, and also the kind of the discomfort of discomfort and of pain to likewise, bring us more, give us more things that sort of push us away from those things. And I just think from an early age we're subconsciously conditioned to avoid pain as if it's this really negative thing, like we're taught that some feelings are good, some feelings are bad, even really good feelings, happiness, joy, whatever it is, we're kind of taught to kind of keep a lid on it a little bit. It's like, be happy, but don't be too happy, because it's a bit weird. You're making mum uncomfortable, not necessarily mum, but you're making someone uncomfortable. But particularly with unhappy, it's like, don't cry, don't be sad, don't worry. And this sort of this level of conditioning starts really young, where our feelings aren't validated. Our feelings are never validated. It's kind of like, well, you shouldn't be feeling like that. No, let me tell you why that emotion is irrational. And the thing is, all emotions are irrational pretty much on a level, right? What we need is to be conditioned or be nurtured in a way where our feelings are validated. And it's like, however you're feeling right now is okay, because you're feeling it. And, the point is actually processing emotions. There's this kind of emotional system, which I'm coming to understand now by sort of understanding it from the sort of the quantum physics and the spiritual view as well, which are kind of linking up as well. This idea that emotions are energy in motion. Everything is energy vibrating at different frequencies. Emotions are energy. And by nature, energy needs to be free flowing, right? But what we do when we resist pain, when we resist any kind of emotions, is actually close up, tense up our system, our body, and it traps this energy within us. And instead of basically learning how to feel difficult emotions, pain, anger, suffering, kind of actually feel them and let them go, let them flow through you, we tense up and we resist them. And I think we all do that, men and women, but women are much more naturally intuitive than men anyway. And I think that this is where then the sort of the gender roles comes into it, right? And that, you've kind of got the sort of, as you say, masculine, go-getter, whatever it would be, role that's been sort of created and over time, reinforced through a very sort of male-dominated culture. Particularly male ego dominated culture. And it's almost like emotions have been for quite a long time viewed as this weak thing, this compromising thing, because it makes you weak, they make you vulnerable. Modern society has not really done anything to change that view, because it's just kind of like almost avoided touching emotions altogether.
Yeah. You are a fucking intelligent guy, may I say. It's so emotionally intelligent. It's fascinating listening to you, because this is stuff that, like, I guess I kind of know on a level, but you're the way that you articulate it is great. Let's touch on the spirituality part, because you mentioned that emotions are energy, right? And that they should be allowed to flow. And a lot of the time people hold in their emotions, they don't allow them to flow as they naturally would. And that's kind of the case which happened with you. You didn't let those emotions flow when you were sitting in that room with your friends, and then suddenly there was a sudden outpour, and that's why you felt so good afterwards, because it was just a release, a flush of all of this pent up energy, right? Can you explain that like I'm 5? Okay, because for some of the listeners, they're not gonna
of course,
so some might not be totally clued up on spirituality, energy, all that sort of stuff, as I am, because I'm interested in it myself. I totally understand what you're saying, but could you explain that for everyone?
And I think this is really important, right? Because spirituality is one of the most butchered words there is, and I think there's every word, right, actually only has the meaning that we give it. So you can have one word that has 1,000 different meanings to 1,000 different people. So that's the first thing to bear in mind, is to put all of your preconceptions about what that word does to you, try and let those go. Spirituality is, I think, again, like everything, about coming up with your own definition and understanding for what it is to you. But for me, it's just the fundamental concept that we're not our mind, and that we're not our ego. And all our ego is this sort of role playing, survival instinct mechanism that our mind evolved over time to get us to fit in with the tribe. You know, if you think about it, from when we're emerging from caves, we can't survive by ourselves. We need to form cohesive societies. To do that, you know, there was usually, if you look at any primate society, there would be an alpha, something like that, and everyone plays their role. So we developed this ego to have a role within the society for our survival. Over thousands of years, we've become identified with this ego as who we are. And all spirituality is the understanding that we're not this ego, we're not this role, we're not all these sort of survival mechanisms and instincts and patterns that have been evolved. We're actually the consciousness underneath. And we know this, right? Because we've always got this chatter going on in our minds, this constant running commentary of the world that sounds like us. It sounds like us because it's in our voice, but it is actually just our mind, our subconscious thinking. You know, thinking is the way that we program stuff into the mind, and it's the way that the mind regurgitate stuff back to us in the present moment. So we think this is us, but we know that we're more than that, because there are times when we've all had where our mind isn't doing anything, where we felt silence, where we felt presence. You know, usually this is in like the most profound moments of our life, right? Where a really happy moment, you're watching a sunset with people you love, whatever it would be. In that moment, you know, usually you feel pretty blissful. Your mind isn't chirping up, or, you know, these fears, these insecurities, these survival defense mechanisms again on you know, firing, and you're present. So just by looking at that, you know, we know that actually we're not this mind, we're not this ego, but we are just something underneath, a consciousness, a spirit, whatever you want to kind of call it. So at the fundamental level, that's what spirituality is for me. And you know, spiritual practices are about deepening that connection, deepening that awareness, so that you can start catching yourself, you know, quicker when your mind is kind of coming in and you know, playing out these what become very automatic, you know, subconscious processes that kind of govern our life. Finding a way to strengthen our awareness and stop those governing your life, and kind of make more intentional choices, deciding how to live it instead. At an energetic level, because that's where I think when you start speaking about energies, that's where people are like, what? Because it just does not compute with the sort of the taught model of reality that we have at school. Quantum physics has shown this, that the whole universe, there's no such thing as empty space. So where we see, you know, looking around the room, you think that there's empty space here, and there's no such thing as empty space. Everything is energy vibrating at different frequencies. So at the sort of very quantum level, you know, even like in between atoms, there's no space in between them. So whatever we see is this energy vibrating, again, at different levels that form the perception of solid objects, of the solid world that we live in.
Yeah, because energy makes up mass, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
So while something might seem solid, like because for a lot of people are going to think energy, they think electricity, or maybe even waves or light or something like that. This desk right in front of me, that's made up of energy. I'm made up of energy. My thoughts are energy itself, simply flowing through my brain. You know, this mic is made up of energy. You're made up of energy. You know, so
yeah. And there's so much. It's incredible actually looking at all the science that's coming out now. You know, kind of various studies and I'm trying to think of what the right word for it is. I can't remember, but you know, showing that we do have this electromagnetic field that kind of, you know, encircles our body, that kind of radiates out from the heart, that is all to do with sort of, you know, energy and signals dictated by emotions, feelings, thoughts. All of these things, they all carry some kind of energetic frequency which contributes to our sort of personal field, if you like. And for me, starting to understand this world of energy and sort of feel into it a little bit, and you know, combine that with spirituality, that's where things have really started to change, in terms of, you know, basically just creating my reality, changing my life, changing the world that I live in. Because it's like, in, you know, I start to see the creation process. That sounds a little bit woo-woo even saying that, but you know, see almost the process of life is kind of working with energy in a more subtle way, rather than kind of you know, how it might have been seen as before, as like sort of trying to work really hard to make something, and then, you know, you get lucky and you receive it. There's a sort of much more subtle world to it, which is I'm trying to explain as in simple terms as I can. I think there's a podcast in itself around this topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of an understanding.
Yeah, you mentioned that we have sort of energy flowing around in fields around us. You mentioned through the heart, goes through your brain, through like your stomach, in different sections of your body. We spoke prior to this recording about a week ago or so, I think it was, and you helped me have a sudden realization because when we talk about how energy flows through our body, if for the listeners, if you just Google electromagnetic field of the body or something like that, there will be a visual, so you'll understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And it's where these sort of fields overlap and stuff is where our chakras are in our body. Now, our chakras are sort of like pools of energy in spirituality is probably how I describe it. You could probably
energy centers or channels or wheels.
Yeah, and you have these all up the body, right? How many is there? 7? Is there?
There's 7 main, but there's 114 in total.
Oh, fair play.
The main ones are, the only ones we really need to worry about that much are the seven main ones that, if you've seen, most people will have seen some kind of drawing of somebody sitting in a lotus position with sort of 7 differently colored wheels going from the spine to the crown of their head. Those are the main ones. Yeah. Do you want to kind of dive into that a little bit as to how that works?
I think it'll be fun because I think what I was thinking was more sort of like your gut feeling and that type of thing. Sure. I thought it would be fun to explain some of that, thinking of your heart, which we talked about last time, because I think that this will reinforce what we're talking about. I think people listening to this right now might be thinking, I don't know, maybe they're chatting shit, right? But I think when we can explain things and explain perhaps why people might feel a certain way, i.e. gut feelings and stuff, it helps back up what we're talking about, because this isn't a mainstream conversation, but it's an important
it's becoming more and more mainstream, this stuff. It amazes me more and more how many, but then again, it might just be the sort of circles that I watch on TikTok and all that stuff. But yeah, I think the first thing to understand with this is that you don't just have one brain, or you don't just have one mind. I don't really know, brain and mind as, again, a whole kind of world of psychology and philosophy getting down that route. But we've got our head brain, our brain mind, we'll call it a mind, which is kind of, what most people assume is the mind. It's the seat of rational thinking, and we live in a society that is extremely identified with rational thought, actually kind of basically giving a meaning to what we experience so that we can better predict what happens and make better choices for our future. The brain is where so much of our sort of survival, rationality is evolved from. But then we've got our heart brain, or our heart mind, where there is actually more neurons going from the heart to the brain than from the brain to the heart. So we've always heard this kind of think with your heart, feel with your heart, whatever it is. It always just sounded like cliches. But there's this organization called the Heart Math Institute, which, going back to the electromagnetic stuff, they'll be doing a lot of these studies. They're showing how this electromagnetic field kind of comes from the heart. This is where the energy from sort of, the quantum realm kind of comes into our body, and where it gets put back out as well. So if you think in terms of the universe, everything being energy, and our heart being the center that kind of interacts with this world of energy, it kind of makes logical sense that, that would be the seat of our intelligence. This is where they say our true intuition comes from, our wisdom. This is, for me personally, since I started thinking about this, every decision that I've made with my heart, and it does, I know people will be going cringing even hearing that, but every decision I've made with my heart has led me to something that I've wanted, or has led me to, an experience that has been integral for my growth, or, has led me to a better situation in my life. And whereas with the mind, we'll sort of process everything and weigh it up and look at it rationally and trying to come up with the best decision based off of what we know. The heart is this true intelligence center, which again is more about feeling and energy and kind of intuition. And again, just to reinforce that point, there's more neurons from the heart to the brain than the brain to the heart. Like, just that fact alone should tell you there's something going on there, right? The final bit is the one that a lot of people will have heard of, which is the gut brain, which is actually where the kind of the root and sacral chakras are, obviously kind of in the gut. And this is where this is the bit that's more connected with the earth, with the planet. It's more connected to kind of survival instincts, basically. Security, feeling safe, understanding if there's threats, that kind of, that gut feeling. We've all had it, where it's like, is this safe for me? Is it not safe for me? And I think sometimes, maybe you'll have had intuition, right, which is probably more of a heart feeling that you think is a gut feeling, because that's just kind of the way that we've always assumed it. But so yeah, that's a really important thing to understand first, and that when you start tuning into your body, and this is where awareness practices like meditation are important, because you realize that you can place your consciousness, you can place your awareness at any point in your body, because we're so identified with our rational mind and our brain and our thoughts. We're most of the time up here, and we forget that we can move our awareness around. When you start to reconnect with your body, when you bring your awareness down into your heart, into your gut, you can start to connect with these signals, these feelings much better, and start using these different messages. Our body is all here to kind of it's communicating with us at all times. And when we start touching in with these signals, that's kind of when we can connect with these other intelligence centers that we've got. Yeah, I think that's kind of it, the start of it in a nutshell. Did you want to kind of get into chakras, particularly kind of what they all are, or do you feel that?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's roll with it, because I think that I feel like this is going to be a longer episode anyways.
Yeah,
and I think this is going to be an incredibly powerful, interesting episode. I'm loving it already. So yeah, let's get into the chakras. Do you mind explaining them for us?
Yeah, of course. Just before that, I do just want to say as well, anyone skeptical, that's okay. It's really okay. There's every single definition that humankind comes up with about the world is in some way being made up by someone. It's like we're trying to take something that is an essence and reduce it to something that the mind can understand. There's a phrase that I love, which is words reduce reality to something the mind can understand, which isn't very much. So it's okay to be skeptical. The point of this is to go out and try and feel for yourself, work out what works for you, and create your own definition of it up, because why not? But yeah, the chakras, right? So what we've got is the root, which is the one right at the bottom, the spine. That is it's associated with, I might forget some of these colors, but it's the color red. It's the one that's connected with the earth, our security. And just very quickly, what each of these energy centers do is actually contribute and relate to a different sort of function of our body. So again, the root is survival instincts. So then it's the sacral, which is kind of the lower part of the abdomen. It's the color orange, and this is more related to sort of the sexual organs, pelvis, obviously the organs that you have in that area. It's more about kind of our relationships, interactions with other people. It's where a lot of our emotions relate to as well. A lot of emotional trauma, and we'll get into this after this next bit, because this is kind of where it actually applies to everyone's life, gets stored in the stomach. The one above that is the solar plexus, obviously kind of just below the bottom of your ribs. That's the color yellow. This is again related to emotional kind of, they link as we go up a little bit. I can't we don't need to go too into the specifics. The next one up is the heart. That's obviously the main energy center. Love is kind of, some spiritual philosophies say that kind of love is all there is. It is the kind of the fundamental energy of life, what some people call God. We're getting down a very big rabbit hole with that one, but that's basically kind of everything to do with the heart chakra, again, kind of feeling, intuition. Then you get up to the throat chakra, which is, so that's the color blue, interestingly, right? We always associate red with love, but in spiritual terms, it's green. I'm not too sure the reason behind that, but the next one up is the throat chakra, which is the color blue, obviously related to self-expression, speaking your truth, all of that kind of things. Then it's the third eye, which is purple or indigo. I get the final two mixed up, but that's the one that a lot of people have heard of, and it relates to the pineal gland, which is here. That's the pineal gland is the kind of the gland in the brain, which is basically secretes DMT in itself, and this is kind of where it relates to obviously DMT and other psychedelics. it's the color purple, and it's to do with kind of objectivity, wisdom, consciousness, things like that. And then the final one is the crown chakra, and this is meant to be kind of what connects us to kind of like higher states of consciousness. So I think that's something that, you know, people will need to explore and experiment with this in themselves. Again, it's a kind of, it's a model of reality, and there's many models of reality, but I do think since I've started working with this, it's really helped me kind of understand things. But what actually matters, right, if we go back to kind of how this energy, the energy body that we have, you know, the quantum level, for things to be healthy, we need a constant free flowing source of energy. You know, we need energy flowing in and out, and everything is, if everything is healthy and there's no blockages. When we create tension and stress in our life, when we resist, when we close up, when we resist emotions, when we're in a state of fight or flight, survival instincts, you know, high levels of cortisol, stress hormones, and we're kind of in our anxious fight or flight mode, which incidentally, modern life, you know, has many of us living in this the majority of the time, certainly far more than we should be doing. This is how we get blockages, and the energy starts to you know, get blocked in certain areas. We trap emotions in certain parts of our body and we don't want to feel them, or we just create literal you know, we're literally like tensing our muscles and tensing parts of our body that just, you know, lead to not a free flowing of energy. And this stagnant energy causes problems. You know, it can relate to actually physical ailments. You know, this is how we now believe a lot of cancers evolve over time. Things like gut issues. I've carried a lot of trauma in my gut, and it's interesting that I've had IBS, sort of gastro issues, for a lot of my life. This is what they think a lot of that relates to. So the point of understanding this, how it actually relates to life, is in, you know, starting to understand where we're carrying stress and tension in our body, and kind of what potentially the reasons for this is. And there's so many links between, you know, kind of where we carry it to kind of how it manifests, you know, in physical ways in our life as well. But then there's also more subtle things, like if you've got a blocked throat chakra, you know, a lot of people might have speech impediments or have difficulty speaking their truth, something like that. You know, sacral or the solar plexus is more difficult with feeling emotions. So there's so many different kind of correlations between, you know, blocked chakras and how it manifests in our life. You know, if you've got problems in your life, things that you want to change or things that you want to improve, looking at it from this angle and going, well, kind of okay, right, well, I have a really big issue with, you know, setting healthy boundaries. Kind of, you know, why is that? And then you can start to think, well, maybe it's to do with some unresolved trauma, you know, somewhere in my sacral chakra, where I felt, you know, that I needed to kind of not have boundaries for people to love me, basically, in a nutshell. So understanding that and working with it on that level is where it becomes sort of, you know, healthy and applicable, helpful and applicable to everyday life, basically.
Yeah, you mentioned two words just then: higher consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on this. So this, right, so Carl Jung, if you've ever heard of Carl Jung, he was one of the founding fathers of modern psychology. In the 60s, you had Freud, Sigmund Freud, and then Jung, who did a lot of work. They, both of them actually, originally theorized this idea of a collective unconscious. You know, this idea that there's varying levels of consciousness kind of within us as an individual, and then the kind of on the broader scale of things, you know, we're connected to this higher consciousness, this higher intelligence, this what a lot of people are now coming to call the superconscious. And you know, I think it's a really good model for and it seems to explain a lot. Again, you know, we can't ever know anything for absolute certainty, but you know, so many of the great geniuses of our history have reported moments or kind of, you know, moments of inspiration or meditative practices. For instance, you know, Edison was a guy who used to whenever he couldn't solve something, trying to think about it, he would have this ritual where he would take like a 1-minute power nap and kind of hold some ball bearings and drop them. They would wake him up and he'd come back with all of these amazing ideas. You know, we know, and there's so many successful people. I think probably speak to anyone who's, you know, is successful. In some ways, they're accessing altered states of consciousness, because there's different levels of consciousness we can access, right? The superconscious, what we call highest, you know, sources of intelligence. I do believe, and you know, again, a lot of models coming out that agree with this, that it is this collective intelligence that we're all a part of. You know, this idea that the whole world is connected. And again, we look at it from an energetic level. It is, because it is all energy interacting with each other in different ways. There does seem to be some kind of source to it all. You know, to have something as complex and amazing as the universe takes a shitload of effort. You know, you've got to like actually have the will to do it, and the energy to do it. At some fundamental level, there has to be a source for this, unless this is all a complete illusion, which some people do say it might be, but there has to be some kind of source of that. And, you know, the only thing that we can turn to, because we're not going to know all the secrets of the universe, is some kind of faith or just trust that there is some kind of higher power. And this is what people throughout the years have called God. And obviously, you know, that's a term that has been corrupted, and you know, for various reasons, we completely turned away from that. But I think that's what this collective higher intelligence is, that you know, we are all God. We're all, you know, God is as much a plant or a lamp or whatever it is. It's just the essence. It's the life source. It's the energy, whatever it is. You know, there does seem to be this higher intelligence at work that, you know, even taking human beings out of the equation, that just causes the earth to operate in the way that it does, where everything is so intricately connected. And maybe that's all you know, just random luck and chance, but it seems to be too perfectly organized to me, you know, to discount the idea that there is some kind of higher intelligence at work. And yeah, that's this idea of the superconscious. And yeah, definitely so many of these great geniuses and inventors report tapping into this idea of an inspiration, you know, getting downloads, and sort of channeling some sort of higher ideas, you know, and then creating from that space. So that's the idea of a higher intelligence.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and we were talking about how a lot of the big historical figures of the world, all your successful people, you touched on Edison, Einstein was someone who came up in the conversation, Mahatma Gandhi, you know, all of these types. They all have an element of craziness about them, a little bit crazy. This conversation that we're having right now might come across as a little bit crazy, because it's because it's not mainstream, because it's not talked about. That's why I'm having this conversation right now, because I don't often have the opportunity to talk to people about this, and it's something I really care about. I think we need to embrace our craziness. I think we need to embrace the unknown. That's exactly what some of the most successful people in the world did in their day and age.
Yeah.
And they mastered their day and age. You know, they were at the peak of human capabilities and achievement. It's no coincidence that these all had a track record of embracing the crazy and stepping a little bit into the unknown, stepping a little bit into the spiritual, and the higher consciousness, if you like. I'm going to share my spirituality for the first time on this podcast. I've spoken about spirituality before, but I haven't actually. I don't believe I've actually spoken about my beliefs before. So. And this ties in. I'm a pantheist, right? So a pantheist is someone who believes that God is everything. God is everywhere. Whatever you want to call it, God, higher consciousness. Some people call
the
it
divine source.
The higher state and all that sort of thing.
The universe.
Yeah, the universe, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So where a theist believes that God is somewhere up in the heavens or somewhere else, an atheist believes there's no God, not at all. I'm a pantheist. Everything is God. Everywhere is God. God is the universe. I am God because I'm part of the universe. God is energy, right? This energy, this pool of energy which we live in, which we call the universe, which, you know, is constantly flowing through us, constantly flowing through itself, because again, everything's universe. We are the universe. We're part of it. If you start to break down the universe and think of it as energy, everything as energy, you'll understand, like you said, it's all connected, right? It's always constantly flowing through each other. And if you start to get into the thinking that thoughts and consciousness is energy itself, you'll begin to understand that we are the universe itself experiencing itself. I
Yeah.
am the
Yeah.
universe looking back at myself,
Mm.
in little old Callum, I'm just a portion of the universe, right? So
Yeah.
of course I'm not going to have the higher intelligence. I'm not the smartest in the world.
Mm.
I'm not God, but I'm a tiny portion of
Yep.
God, higher consciousness, whatever, the universe,
Yeah.
energy, etc.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I love
so
that.
so I think that it's essentially what you were talking about there. I think it's very similar.
Yeah, do you know what? Thanks for that. I'd never heard of that phrase. Pantheist, was it?
Pantheist, yeah,
Yeah,
pantheist. So
which
atheist,
yeah,
theist,
definitely.
pantheist, pan as
Yeah,
in like everything,
there's
you know.
there's another word which I identify with as well. Omniism, which is the belief that no single religion is the source of truth, but there's truth within all of these. And this is what I've been thinking a lot about religion, and actually fundamentally they all seem to point towards the same thing, the same idea that kind of life is suffering, and that there are ways that we can ascend towards heaven, ascend towards enlightenment, whatever it is. I believe that this is just different levels of consciousness. Suffering is caused by the victimhood stage of consciousness, which most of us exist in, where we're very identified with our ego, and kind of life is being run by these survival patterns which cause all our suffering. And higher levels of consciousness, connecting with source, whatever you want to call it, that's what these religions are actually there to help you do. Over time they've been corrupted, hijacked by egos and egoic men, mostly, almost entirely actually, turning them into sources of power. And that's why eventually we got rid of them. But within them all, they do seem to point towards a similar truth, and I like that way of looking at it as well.
Just a quick one, because I'm going to shift the conversation in a second, not too much, but a little bit to a different topic. Just quickly, what do you believe happens when we die?
That's an interesting one. So from an energetic standpoint, energy can't be destroyed; it can only transfer into something else, right? I believe if we are all God, if we're all the universe, I think we just we move back into this sort of higher source of consciousness. I honestly, to be honest with you, I don't really have a bloody clue.
Yeah.
But what I do know is that, and this is, I think, one of the greatest gifts you can get from a spiritual practice, a spiritual belief, is that I don't fear death like I used to. I don't view it as this, and I think this is where egoic identification causes so much pain and suffering. It's like we believe we're this one thing here trying to survive the crazy world that we're a part of, and death is the worst thing that can ever happen. And this is one of the really, I think, damaging parts of our society, is that we kind of demonize death, and we view it as this horrible thing to be avoided. And yes, it does cause pain when we lose people, but it's actually our attachments to the idea of having that person. It's our attachments that cause our suffering. It's not the act of that person dying in self. Death is a natural part of the cycle of life. The universe is in a process of growth and expansion. Life and death, it's all part of it. It's all this, it's cyclical. It's all part of the same cycle. And I don't know what happens, but I have a fundamental belief that it's beautiful. I think that in many ways life is, if we believe, right, that and I do believe this in some ways, that kind of fundamentally love is all there is. God, the universe, consciousness is this kind of beautiful higher, all the amazing things that we experience in life. For the universe to know itself as that, it needed to create a situation where you could have its opposite. Because if love is all there is, that's all you ever experience, you don't appreciate it very much, right? If you're always living in the same thing. You needed to create its opposite. And this is where we have this experience of life. And again, why it's so important to embrace difficulty, embrace pain, because without those experiences, you don't experience the love, you don't experience the sort of the positive, if we want to call it, kind of as intensely. You need the contrast, you need the ups and downs. But yeah, I believe that this is what the sort of the human or the universal life we experience is, and once we die, we go back to just pure love, or whatever it is. I don't really know, but I'm sure it will be great.
Yeah, figure it out when we get there, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's, we're here. Let's focus on being here, but let's definitely not be carried away fearing death while we're doing it. I just think that's a terrible waste of time and energy.
Yeah, so we've spoken about all of this incredibly heavy spiritual talk, which is quite It's difficult to
Yeah.
wrap your head around sometimes, difficult to
Yeah, for
process
sure.
sometimes. Let's bring it back to self-development. So how does all of this spirituality, how does that tie into self-development? Because we touched upon social conditioning earlier. We've touched
Mm-hmm.
upon ego. And I do want to talk specifically more about ego.
Yeah.
So sort of, where does the ego come from, and why might it be perceived as a bad thing? Why might we,
Hmm.
what in what way do we need to develop when we're talking about spirituality? Like, what are we moving towards?
Yeah.
What's the purpose of going through these spiritual journeys, if you like, or
Hmm.
self-development
Hmm.
journeys,
So there's different definitions and levels of ego, as with every word. I think in the West, growing up, the sort of subconscious or the general accepted definition of it, when you hear, oh, he's got a big ego, it was kind of this um, almost just more like an inflated vision of who you are. But in a spiritual sense, the ego is this false identity. It's this me, kind of who we believe ourselves to be, based off our past experiences, based off of the way the mind works is that we we basically, sorry, I'm going to take a quick step back here. So going back to the kind of levels of the mind, you've got the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and then the superconscious. What matters here is the subconscious and the conscious mind. The conscious mind is where we, as the consciousness, reside. We experience life through the five senses, and we make a judgment about what we experience, and that data gets sent to the subconscious. The subconscious runs about 99% of our life, because it's like a giant computer. Everything that we experience, every bit of sensory data, every judgment, every thought, everything gets sent to the subconscious and stored like a vault, like a computer. It's like a line of code. Every thought, everything that we experience gets written into our subconscious like a line of code. Over time, this coding forms the software that is our personality, the software that becomes this ego, this identity for who we are. Because the mind, its role is to keep us alive, right? And to do that, it needed to evolve patterns and sort of programs, so that we didn't always have to be making conscious decisions in every moment. So if you're in a situation where you've been in that before, it's much more efficient to have kind of subconscious programs that do that action for you and kind of make you repeat how you usually do it. This is how muscle memory is, how we learn anything, right? It's just these kind of your subconscious taking over, so you don't have to consciously think about it, and we can direct our conscious attention elsewhere. It's designing these autopilot patterns to as a survival mechanism. The ego is a part of that, there's probably many different layers to it. One of the most important ways to understand it is, again, this idea of, in order to fit in with society, we needed to have a role, and this is where it's about kind of creating this persona, creating this role that you would have within the tribe in order to fit in and be accepted. And I think that's the main idea of what ego is. It's this identity that we become identified with, thinking that it is us on one level, because this is what our mind is trying to do, and on another level, because this is what society is telling us we are as well. We get put in these boxes from an early age at school. You're sporty, you're all academic, you're this, you're that. This becomes who we think that we are. And over time, the more that we live out these patterns, the more they become wired in. We literally grow stronger neural connections in our brain, which makes these things, more ingrained into kind of our subconscious patterns. And all the ego is identification with these patterns, and therefore kind of forgetting that we're not any of that. We are just consciousness. We're just the sort of consciousness underneath. So yeah, again, as with everything, there's different layers to it, but I think seeing it as this survival, or sort of seeing it as this false identity is the most important part to it. Where self-development comes in, is understanding that a lot of what motivates ego is motivated in terms of how we're perceived by other people. And so we're doing things so as to get a certain reaction from someone else, rather than actually kind of focusing on, well, what do I actually want from life? What do I actually want for me? When we're identified with ego, we get so caught up trying to do these sort of weird things, so as to try and control how someone else perceives us. Again, rather than just being really true to what we want to create in life and true to how we live. So the whole point of spiritual practice or self-development, I believe, is to kind of get away from this so that we can actually direct our time and life into doing and creating the things that we want to experience, rather than being, just kind of governed by this world of fearful social anxiety that is the world of ego.
So it's where you begin to use spirituality as something to help you understand your true self, and in understanding your true self, that is where you will start to live a life which is truly happy, fulfilled, and ultimately that's what the podcast is about. Happy Days is about living a happy, fulfilled life. So
summarized all my waffle in a succinct chunk. Yeah,
but you had to do the waffle in the first place for me to even wrap my head around it, because you're far more articulate than I am. Trust me when I say that. So yeah, I mean, this is a heavy episode, as I've said. It's going to be a slightly longer one because there's so much conversation in it. I love it. It's brilliant. No, but that is exactly where it ties into self-development. Of course, this is a self-development podcast. Some people might be wondering, yeah, we might be energy, yeah, whatever. What's the bloody point in it, though? That is the point. That is the point. That is because it gives us a level of understanding which we can use to go ahead and live a life which is happier, without fear, like you said, without hate, negativity, etc., etc. It's setting the record straight, I suppose. If and
it's understanding that, again, that phrase, we create our own reality. So we formulate beliefs over time, and this is subconscious beliefs, gets wired into our subconscious. These beliefs filter our perception of reality, filter our experience of life, according to these beliefs. So if we wire in a belief into our subconscious that says the world is a certain way, our brain is wired so as to actually secrete a bit of dopamine every time that it sees and notices something that conforms to that belief. This is why we're so flawed, right? It's how you can have two people who believe completely different things, so convinced that they're right, and we end up with such a polarized society as we've got today. It's because our mind is wired to reward us to conform to these beliefs and also filter out reality according to that. So a lot of it is understanding that when you're identified with this ego, the pain and the suffering that you're feeling, the difficulties you're experiencing, you are creating those, you are creating that reality. And once you learn that, you learn that you can create a different reality for yourself as well, create one that you want, create one that you choose instead. That's what it's all about. It's about unlearning all the bullshit and then choosing what you want to create instead.
What I believe is that this is slightly moving into something different now, but I believe that the downfall of the human race started at the beginnings of civilization. Imagine the world where we were before we were civilized, before we started farming and growing food, when we were hunter-gatherers, living in tribes. We still see humans that are living like this today, and they are some of the happiest people you will ever know. Not that I've met them personally, but from what I've heard and what I've studied and understood, is that the uncontacted tribes of the Amazon and the other rainforests that we have in the world, the majority of them are in the Amazon now, because we've totally ruined this planet. But they are some of the happiest people you will ever meet. And I can't remember who the guy exactly was, but someone was explaining to them the concept of suicide, of the concept of humans voluntarily killing themselves because they are so unhappy. And when these tribes first understood this and learned of this, they laughed in the geezers' faces. They stood there and laughed, and that would be rude for us, obviously. If you're talking about suicide, it's a topic which is quite heavy, deep,
prevalent in today.
Yeah, absolutely. And but they laughed in their faces because they could not wrap their head around why the hell you'd want to kill yourself. And this ultimately stems from those people that live in the rainforest. They do not rely on their ego nearly as much as we do today, because they are not civilized. We people use this word uncivilized as if you might use that as like a monster or a feral dog or something. But we are the ones that we are the feral dogs. We are the uncivilized, in that we've become civilized because we've so lost our way. If you think about every issue we have in the world, every single one of them would be solved if we went into tribes and lived in the rainforest. Every single one of them. Think about it. You know, suicide, depression, famine, overpopulation, the whole lot, ego as well. You know, this is what we're talking about.
I mean, this fundamentally, sorry to interrupt you, is you know, why I'm doing this is because I do believe, like you said, is that all the problems we face find their root in our relationship to our mind, in the fact that we've lost connection with nature. We've lost connection with the fact that we're every bit as much a part of the universe as the trees, as the plants, as everything else. I completely agree. Sorry to interrupt you, because I was really enjoying what you were saying.
No, that's okay. That's totally fine, because what you're saying is absolutely true. We've totally lost our way, and in living in this lifestyle which is totally unnatural to us, where, you know, we start to, you know, live in concrete cities and such. We have entirely lost our way. And something which would go to benefit us, you know, the ego, the mind, the way the mind would naturally work. Now we're in a new environment which the brain wasn't built for. The brain was built for the tribes in the Amazon. The brain was built for the ancient Homo sapiens that were roaming the earth. We are using a piece of hardware which does not suit the environment. You know, we're trying to play a PS5 game with an Atari. It's not going to work. You know, it's going to get totally, the game's going to corrupt, right? And then you know, that's where it all goes wrong. So
that's what we're seeing.
I just thought I'd just sort of
I love it.
That point in there, because it's part of the the falling down of the human race.
You know? It is. And you know, and it can sound, you know, very esoteric and kind of grandiose to say things like this, but you know, I think it is important. I believe, again, that everything is connected, not just in a spiritual sense, but in a social sense. You know, I think one of the other flaws of the way our society is set up is this idea of specialization. You know, everybody is so specialized in a niche, in this kind of area of the world that they focus on. When you start to kind of take a step back and look at the full picture, you see how many of these things interact with each other. You know, you see how kind of sciences and philosophy and all of it comes together. And it's only in looking at the whole picture that you can actually try and formulate some idea of what truth is. But you know, we're taught that we've got to specialize and focus down, and you know, because that's where we can be the most effective and the most productive. That's kind of true, but you get a very narrow view of the world when you're kind of, you know, only seeing it through the eyes of I don't know, a marine biologist. That's just the first thing that came to my head. Or whatever it is. You know, when you're only seeing it through that eyes and not looking at the wider context, it's you know, that in itself causes problems, because it is all connected. All of it kind of plays a part in it. And this is where things like self-development, growth, changing yourself, you know, yes, it's great because you mean you can create a better life for you, but it's not just about that. It's about the bigger scheme of things. You know, it's about actually changing ourselves to change the world, because, you know, I think, again, we're so conditioned to believe that for change to happen, for these problems to get sorted out, it's on the governments, it's on the corporations, it's on these power structures. Because again, these systems have conditioned us to believe that we're reliant on them for change to happen. It's how control works, but it's not how change is going to happen. Change is going to happen on the micro level, by you and me and everybody else deciding to be different, deciding to change the way that we act and the way that we live. You know, and on that scale, that is how any great social change has happened. And it's why doing this stuff is so important, because by breaking out of our conditioning, we're literally, you know, getting rid of the grip that these power structures have on the way that we live our life.
In our lifetimes, as we grow up and, you know, become older, and when we begin to see a new world which is emerging, we are going to see an absolute revolution of self-development, an absolute revolution of people talking about these conversations and shifting their mindset, I guess you could say, around first of all who they are, second of all what they want, and third of all how the bloody hell they can get it. You know?
Literally. Well, I believe, and many people say this, we're in the midst of a mass awakening at the moment on this planet, and I think that, you know, my experience is not unique. I would, you know, be interested in how would you say that your spiritual beliefs and everything is, and self-development, all of it, is deepened throughout COVID? Was it brought along mainly by COVID, or?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I'd probably say I first became, you know, it. I don't like using this word, but I got awoken. You know, had a spiritual
Yeah.
awakening, or
Yeah.
you know, sudden realization, whatever you want to call it. I kind of had that as I left school, at the end of year 11, and then after that, that was when I started struggling with my mental health, funnily enough, and I think I fell asleep again. You know, I can't quite understand why. I got lost somewhat in those years, and as I say, I fell asleep again and didn't think about these stuff as much. Probably because I thought I was a fucking weirdo. You know, I had an awakening, started thinking little bit different, thinking about these things, sort of changing myself, and then that change in myself pointed out to me how different I was, and then I you know, collapsed into myself, I suppose you could say, and I fell asleep again. And this all might sound like woke talk or something, but I think if the people listening to this have sort of had I've been thinking about these concepts that we're talking about, and that kind of thing, you'll be able to relate to what I'm saying when you say woken up. You know, it is almost like a sudden realization where you I suppose to start thinking about these things. Anyway,
Well, you
certainly
realize
over
that
COVID, I think sort of brought me back into it, at least, you know, and sort of put me back in touch with how I was before. I think it was probably slightly gradual, you know, because I think when I went through my mental health issues, that sort of shut me off to it somewhat, but it was still the door was slightly ajar, if that makes sense. And then since COVID, just before COVID, probably it's slowly opened. And throughout COVID, it's, you know, it's wide open now. I've got a bloody podcast talking about self-development now. So, you know, it's that's me really. Yeah.
No, it's really interesting to hear that. I think I was just trying to, I mean, I can't personally relate to kind of having that moment and going, you know, kind of going back, but I do think that you know, that does happen, perhaps even in sort of smaller aspects. You know, it's not like, and I think this is where this idea of like an awakening to you know, and this woke culture terminology, you know, people kind of almost maybe subconsciously view it as like you have this moment and suddenly you're this person who's got everything worked out and figured out. That's not it at all. You know, it's like you have a moment of realization of your power to create your reality. I think that's what it is. It's awakening to the fact that actually you haven't been living consciously, and various programmings and things have been governing your life, but then that you can change. That doesn't mean that overnight all your problems are gone. It just means that you're aware of them, and that's the key of an awakening. You know, still slip back into moments of unconsciousness. This is where the work gets done, because it's all back to the subconscious and the wiring. We've got to gradually undo that. You know, it's like it takes a while to get to that stage. It takes a while to grow new connections and for the old ones to fade through something called neuroplasticity. You know, our brain is always changing, but it takes time. It's not a you know, there's that phrase, growth is a dance, not a light switch. We're going to come back to bits that we thought we got rid of, you know, because it's just the way of things. But I think that's important to understand, that it's not just an instant fix.
No, it's not. It's certainly not. It's the moment you understand that we are all brainwashed, every single one of us. You know, you know, it doesn't mean you're suddenly you're brought out of that brainwashing. We all have it. You know, even myself. I'm sure you will too. You know, in some way. And when I'm talking 100%. About this brainwashing, I mean, you know, stuff like consumerism and, you know, the way that our egos have lost their way somewhat over the years of the human race and stuff. That's the brainwashing I'm talking about.
Relationships, you know, we're all conditioned to believe that you need a relationship to have meaning in your life, or that someone's going to come along and complete you. You know, there's so many different ways that we're programmed, and that these things kind of you know, formulate what we do. And it's like peeling back layers of an onion. You realize just how much, you know, how many of the things that you believed about the world, the way the world works, were put in you by someone else who had it put in them by someone else. And it's like, actually, did any of us choose this? Did any of us actually decide this? Not probably not.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. What a conversation that's been, Tobias.
I really enjoyed
I've got a couple more questions before we wrap it up. First of all,
Sure.
what would be your advice for young people that are listening to this podcast right now? Could be about anything, not necessarily what we've spoken about, but whatever you want.
Mm. I think finding the courage to be disliked, and not even necessarily disliked, but disliked in your mind. I think that we'll often think that, and we use the term disliked, judged, laughed at, whatever it is. Starting to lean into that insecurity and embrace that difference, is probably so important and profound in terms of actually connecting with your authentic truth, connecting with who you really are and what you really want to do. So much of our life is governed by fear of what other people think, and through trying to conform, and through this fear of being judged. It goes back to this conversation we're having. Maybe we'll get called crazy, and like you say, I mean, Galileo was imprisoned because he was the first guy that came up with the idea of astrology. My point is that leaning into being different and being thought of as an outsider, whatever it is a path that you're going to find for you, your authentic truth, and what matters most to you. So I would definitely say that probably being as one of the number one things, because what that also means is finding comfort in discomfort, finding being okay with pain, being okay with insecurities, being okay with discomfort. If we can find a way to embrace these things and stop running from them, then life becomes so much easier instantly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with everyone, because I think I get a lot of different answers to that question as I ask everyone, and that is that's a big one, I think, especially for people on their self-development journeys, is to start making that journey back to the true self, and making those steps.
And it's difficult. I
100%.
I battle the people think every day, but it's about leaning into that and going, okay, that scares me, therefore I need to do it. And I mean, when I started on my Instagram, I was, it's awful. I spent a week just as almost a bit of a wreck, but going through that was powerful. It means that I confronted those insecurities that were there, and again, still more work to do, but we need to go through that pain to get through it.
That's where all kinds of growth comes from, whether it be physical, mental, or more along the spiritual, I guess, if you like, or self-development, that we've been talking about. Through pain comes growth, and whenever you're uncomfortable, struggling, whatever it is, just know that in every moment you're growing in those moments. Final question, Tobias. I'm quite interested and intrigued to hear this. It's a total cliche and subjective question, which I ask everyone. It's usually a lot of fun, but I'm wondering if you're going to come up with a really intellectual answer. Tobias, what's your meaning of life?
My meaning of life is just to live, and it's a very cliche way of putting it, but I think it is simple. I think life is simple, and the ego, society, everything tries to complicate it and sort of say, what is this meaning? I think we're literally here to have an experience, and that experience is for you to decide what it is. It's for you to decide how I'm going to create myself, and that's something we didn't quite touch on. I don't want to get down a huge hole with that, but like, you create who you are. Your identity is not set in stone. So life is an experience that you choose. So you choose how you experience it, and you choose who you become in the process of that experiencing. So I guess you could summarize it by saying it's about creating. It's the process of creation, and I think that's really all there is to it for me.
What a wonderful way to wrap up the podcast, Tobias. Thank you so much for joining me for the episode, because you're welcome. It's been I say a lot of the time that the newer episodes are my favorites, but this is hands down my absolute favorite episode I've recorded so far. Out of
Thank you. Well, it's my favorite.
60. Oh, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, but it's been such a refreshing, intellectual, just challenging in some ways, but a wonderful conversation. And I truly do love having these types of talks with people, because you don't often get the chance to have them.
And people listening, go out and have your own conversations about this. If you think I'm batshit crazy, if you think we're full of it, that's great. Go and talk about it. That's what the problems are being caused by, is that nobody talks about stuff anymore. And it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. Go on.
I was just gonna say, I want to take a moment to acknowledge you as well, mate, because I think what you're doing is really great, and it's so important that more people go out there and build platforms like this and share stuff. And I think what you're doing is really great. So thank you for having me on.
No, you're welcome, dude, and thank you so much for that. It's really kind of you to say. Where can all the listeners find you on social media and stuff, in case they want to get in touch or just follow some of your stuff that you're sharing?
Yeah, two best ways: TikTok and Instagram. I'm going to try and do both. They say focus on one, but I'm going to try and do both. I think TikTok is obviously more video based stuff, and that is at Tobias Matthew, and Instagram is at _Tobias Matthew. There'll be a lot of overlap between what I'm posting, a lot of video stuff, but on Instagram hopefully some more. At the moment I'm kind of just ironing out what I'm putting together, but on Instagram there'll be some other posts to complement that.
Nice one, dude. What an episode. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So there you go. That's the end of the show. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe on your podcasting app of choice so you can download and listen as each episode is released. If this episode helped you in any way, tell your friends, tell your family, maybe even leave a cheeky review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps the show. But that's all for now. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode, released shortly. Take care.